Have you ever looked at a brand and wondered how on earth did they go from a small boutique thing to being everywhere? It's a huge challenge, right? Especially in a world as crazy competitive as beauty. Well, we're about to pull back the curtain on the system one brand built to make that exact leap.
You know, every brand has to start somewhere, and for a lot of them, it's right here. A nice, manageable order, maybe 10,000 units. It's a number that feels real, you know? You can get your product out there, see what the market thinks, and you can do it without betting the whole farm.
And then there's the dream, the big goal. We're talking mass market scale with volumes over 1 million units a year. And listen, this isn't just about adding a couple of zeros. It's a totally different universe of production, logistics, and quality control. The jump is just massive.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How do you actually bridge that huge gap? How do you go from a few pallets of product to entire shipping containers without everything turning into total chaos and a quality nightmare? That's exactly what we're going to unpack right now.
And here it is, the main idea right up front. Scaling up isn't really about just placing bigger and bigger orders. Anyone can do that. It's about building a disciplined, repeatable system. A system that's specifically designed from the ground up to handle all that complexity and volume. Let's follow that journey.
So, where did this whole thing kick off? Well, it wasn't with some huge, splashy product launch. Nope, it all started in the trenches, with what looked like really simple, small orders. This first phase was all about setting the rules and building the discipline that would be the foundation for everything else.
Okay, let's look at one of the very first orders. It was for 15,000 units of a 10 milliliter roll-on bottle. It seems pretty straightforward, but the real story is in the details. It had this bright green coating, white silkscreen printing, and, get this, 3 different designs with 5,000 pieces each. Even the packing was spelled out, individually bagged, then put on a pallet. Every single detail matters.
So see, this was never just about getting 15,000 bottles made. This tiny order was actually a test. A test of the supplier's entire system. Could they handle 3 different artworks in one run without mixing them up? Could they make sure the color and printing looked the same on every single bottle? Could they even pack it right? These little orders, they're the real proving ground for a supplier.
All right, so you can see how things are starting to build. After they proved the basics, the brand introduced a dropper bottle. Now that might sound like a small change, but it brought a whole new world of hidden engineering risks to the table. The kind of risks that can absolutely sink you when you try to scale up.
And here are those risks. You've got things like inconsistent torque. So some caps are way too tight and others are practically falling off. Pipette lengths that are too long or too short for the bottle. And the one everyone dreads, leakage during shipping. All of this just adds up to a messy, inconsistent experience for your customer. And trust me, they absolutely notice when the second product they buy feels different than the first. This is where you realize you need a system for fit and function, not just for how things look.
Okay, now we're moving into phase 2, and this is where the stakes get a lot higher. The brand starts moving into jars, a category where the cosmetic quality is absolutely everything. This is also where the partnership hits its first real crisis, and we get to see how real trust is built.
You know, a lot of brands win or lose the scaling game when they get to jars. And here's why. A bottle, it might be hidden in a box, right? But a jar sits out on a bathroom counter. Every little flaw, a tiny pinhole, a speck of dust, is right there for everyone to see. Then you add in complex finishes like frosting, and you've just multiplied the ways things can go wrong. This requires a way higher level of quality control.
Look, in any long-term manufacturing relationship, it's not a question of if something will go wrong, it's when. It's just inevitable. And that moment, that's the ultimate test of the partnership. So, what happened when a problem finally popped up?
The problem was a short shipment. The client got fewer units than they ordered, which, as you can imagine, is a complete disaster for their production schedule. But look at the response. No finger-pointing, no excuses. Instead, it was an immediate escalation. The supplier put the client's needs first, rushed a replacement order, and then, this is key, they implemented a formal corrective action plan to figure out the root cause and make sure it never, ever happened again. That is how a simple transaction becomes a real strategic partnership.
And all of that trust, it laid the groundwork for the big one, phase 3, a massive multi-SKU perfume program. This was it. This was the moment where all the discipline, all the testing, and all the trust they'd built earlier came together, but now at an incredible scale.
Just take a second to look at these numbers. We're not talking about a single product anymore. This is a complete system. 6 different colorways,
Pink, rose, black, you name it. Production was so big, it was split into 2 batches, for a grand total of over 250,000 sets. The only way you can manage that kind of complexity is if you have a rock-solid system already in place.
This chart just gives you a sense of the sheer volume. The rose and frosted versions alone were over 60,000 units each. This wasn't some small test run. This was a full-blown, mass-market launch, and it was all built on one standardized, systematic platform.
So how in the world did they pull this off without any major disasters? Well, they shifted from a subjective, yeah, that looks good kind of approval to objective, data-driven testing. And this right here is the heart of the system. Formal checks for fitment, vacuum sealing, adhesion tests for the decoration, and surface quality inspections. Suddenly, quality wasn't just an opinion anymore. It was data. All right, so what's the big lesson here? Let's boil this entire story down into an actual playbook you can use. This is the framework that made all of this possible, and it's something any brand can start putting into place, like today. This is how you build your own system.
Everything, and I mean everything, starts with the pre-production sample, or PPS. This is absolutely non-negotiable. Think of the PPS as the golden sample. It's the one physical unit that everyone, from marketing to production to QC, signs off on. It becomes the single source of truth, and it completely eliminates all those arguments later about what was expected versus what was delivered.
The system itself is built on 4 simple quality gates, and each one targets a specific way things could fail. Gate A, fitment, prevents those wobbly caps and wrong pipette lengths we talked about. Gate B, sealing, stops the leaks. Gate C, decoration, catches those cosmetic flaws on the jars. And Gate D, packing, makes sure it all shows up in one piece. Together, they're like a safety net that protects your brand when you scale.
So if you're going to remember anything, remember this. Here are the practical rules for your own scaling system. First, lock in that PPS approval as a gate you never, ever skip. Second, start treating fitment like the serious engineering task it is. Third, demand proof. Make things like vacuum and adhesion testing a standard requirement. And finally, figure out your escalation plan before things go wrong, because they will.
And that really brings us to the final and most important point. The brand in this story didn't get to over 1 million units just by ordering more stuff. They got there because they built a system of discipline, of testing, and of trust that started with that very first tiny order. So the question I'll leave you with is this: are you just placing bigger orders, or are you building your system for scale?